Thank you.
It's all yours from here.
Hey, community. Welcome to the ABC Realty Podcast. Woohoo! We wanted to take this opportunity for you to get to know us and for us to get to know you. And I have two guests with me here today that will help to tell the story of ABC Realty. My first guest here in studio with me is Michaela Patrick. She's our operations manager. Say hello. And we also have Monet Augustin, and she is a real estate professional with ABC Realty. Say hello to Monet. So we're just gonna get right to it. We're gonna have a conversation about who and what ABC Realty is. And if you don't know, we are a small indie brokerage. We are the only Black and female-owned brick and mortar real estate brokerage here in the Twin Cities area. And we pride ourselves in being a small indie brokerage and being rooted in community. And we're going to talk about that today. The activities that we do that root us into community. We're going to talk about how we use the brokerage as a jumping off place for young professionals. And we're going to talk about how we get into the nitty gritty of one-on-one coaching and mentoring to make sure that we're all successful. So welcome to the show, and I hope you enjoy this conversation today. So Michaela, let's start with you since you're here in studio. So Michaela is our operations manager. Really, she's my boss, right? I work for her, so don't be fooled, because she runs lots of different aspects of the brokerage. But I especially want her to talk about her experience with the community building work that we do that helps us to stay rooted in community and to stand in that space, guys, of that intersectionality of real estate and equity.
Yeah, so it's been amazing being here with ABC Realty for almost a year now. And I was in college when I started my senior year. And I had to do a senior project, a pretty big one. So when I joined, I knew very little about real estate and housing, but Cian is such a great expert. She taught me everything that I know, everything that you need to know. And so when I started, part of the job was being a liaison to the Eastside Housing Justice Coalition. And so that branched out, that started from ABC Realty's community work. And so we dove into the East Side's housing issues, rental issues, problems in the community. So
what would you say, Michaela, is a challenge for folks on the East Side when it comes to ownership and renting?
There's a lot, like you said, intersectionality is a huge thing. So if you are an LGBT in the community, a person of color in the community, through my project, which I'll talk about later, you can see if you were in a single parent household, you are impacted. Minimum wage people, if you went to jail, because in the East Side we have primarily people of color in the community, and we know through studies and research there's disproportionate amounts of people of color, especially Black males, going to jail in our communities. And so how can they provide for their families? Who's paying rent? Who's taking care of these babies? And so that's a very real issue that we see come up, and try to discuss different policies and options on how to create more affordable housing, and close the wealth gap. So it was amazing to work with ABC Realty and get an internship with the Eastside Housing Justice Coalition all at the same time. And so that made me go down a rabbit hole for my project. So I was into coding, and so I actually got the opportunity to do my whole project on housing, looking in both in the cities, the St. Paul, Minneapolis area, and then overall in Minnesota, and comparing how housing and rent is affected by different factors. And so I could calculate these very accurately through the coding program. So I ran regressions, and some of the biggest things, like I said, if you're a single parent household, affects your ability to pay rent, affects your child's ability to buy a home in the future. We also learned a lot about the Rondo neighborhood being torn down, and the housing, what do they call housing, where they write it in the deed that you could not sell to a Black person.
The deed restrictions.
The deed restrictions.
Yeah.
And so those effects are what I was seeing in my research. And so that was the cause. And a lot of people want to say, that happened in the past.
Right.
We're not dealing with that anymore,
today.
and we are. That affects 100% every person of color trying to get housing on the east side or anywhere in Minnesota, really, because it didn't set us up for generational wealth.
Yeah. And literally, there was a time when it was in your deed where you couldn't sell to a Black family. And the Mapping Prejudice program has done a beautiful and amazing job of identifying all of these deeds in Minneapolis that still have that restrictive language in them, and helping the current homeowners get it removed from their deeds. And they're taking that program and rolling it out in St. Paul, that Mapping Prejudice program. So if you haven't heard of that Mapping Prejudice, that's a wonderful and inspiring project to get behind and even volunteer to participate, because it was all done with volunteers.
Yeah, so ABC, because of my experience, one of my professors actually contacted me and said, hey, do you want to be on the back end of this? Do you want to be one of the team leaders in the Mapping Prejudice and Welcome Thy Neighbor project? And so that was an immediate job opportunity after college that I wasn't expecting because of ABC Realty. So they were very much so a launch pad to my career. And
tell us about the Welcome Home program.
Honestly, I haven't dug into it yet. I have not.
So this is all
this
in
is
front
all
of you now.
New to me so far.
Wow, that's exciting.
But I know that it bounces off the Mapping Prejudice, and St. Kate's is taking that over from the U of M this next year. So it's a big project, and we're trying. I know that they're trying to do more of the state, like the entire state. They want to try and look at those deeds, see and make maps of what was, segregated.
Yeah.
And why we have the worst redlining problem still, in the state. Yeah.
So you use this term redlining, and in case somebody's listening and they haven't heard that term, redlining is where mortgage lenders would not lend or give mortgages on properties in areas that they deemed not valuable. And so the reason we have a North Minneapolis today and an East St. Paul today and a Frogtown neighborhood today, or a Rondo neighborhood today, is a result of years and years and years of policy, racially motivated policy, and restrictive covenants on deeds. So that's the cause and effect, right? The cause happened years and years and years ago, but the effect we are still struggling with today. Would you agree?
Oh yeah. No, I think anyone who lives here can clearly see, and then where you've got those poverty lines, and you can see it in the schools too, because the schools are funded by neighborhoods. Well, that's going to keep people in poverty. because they're funding those schools less.
Mhm.
And then while places, the suburbs,
Mhm.
gaining more money,
Mhm.
gaining better education,
Right.
and
They have bigger budgets,
programs.
right?
Yeah, programs in their schools, bigger
Mm.
budgets for better teachers,
Right.
better coaches.
Better technology.
Exactly.
Like Wyzetta.
Yep.
Right.
And so while those generations keep going
Mhm.
up, the poverty, that's why they stay
Yeah.
low,
Yep. Property taxes. Yep.
Exactly.
Fund the schools.
Yeah.
And Monet, I know that you do a lot of work in this space, in housing equity. And what can you share in your experience working in this space?
I would say that the people that I talk with, and honestly, this goes across the board. The biggest issue primarily is how we do lending, and I think mainly how taxes play a role in that, and employment is such a big thing. Um, so, like you were saying, when you don't have a consistent job history, if you've had time in jail or um, for whatever reason you haven't been able to, you've been prevented from keeping jobs for the 2 years, or you have gaps, then suddenly you can't get a house. So I think that that is definitely a huge part of it, especially for a lot of people that have been working under the table jobs and that way, where they've had consistent employment, they've had consistent income, the money is there, but then they just can't get that mortgage.
Because they can't prove that income. They can't demonstrate that income.
Exactly. So basically what it comes down to is if you don't pay taxes, you're not getting a house. So even if you, break your back doing, working however many hours a week, if you're not reporting that money to the government,
Mm.
you're not getting a house.
Mm.
Then you run into lines of credit where, um, you know, credit education is not widely distributed. I think a lot of communities that have more access to that type of information, and so that puts a lot of people behind at least a few steps, because that's just an extra step that you have to go through in order to get a house. And then these factors together, they make it so difficult. And then not having a stable place to live, it results in general instability. And I would like to just say that my experience with ABC Realty has been incredible because it's people that understand that and see that and want to change that.
Before you came to ABC Realty, Monet, you were with another brokerage, which we will remain unnamed. But tell us about your experience with that broker.
Well, I was brought into it by a friend, and this friend was definitely I'm gonna make money and it's gonna be awesome. Um, so, and I, upon first meeting, I generally liked the people. They offered me a spot on their team, and I didn't really interview around with any other brokerages. I think at this time I didn't really know how being a realtor could actually tie in with my morals, I guess. Um, but through working with this brokerage for, I think I was there for 7 months. Um, Through working with them, I just saw a lot of behavior that made me really uncomfortable. So this would be uh, team members, passing on leads, passing on clients, passing on people that are looking for housing because it's not going to pay enough, because um, one of the final straws for me was someone passed on the client because, one, it wasn't a big enough payout, and two, she didn't work in North Minneapolis.
Mm.
Um,
So you're
so
telling me that there was a buyer who was pre-approved and had a mortgage to buy, but the team member would not work with them because they wanted to buy in North Minneapolis, and that team member said, no, I don't work in North Minneapolis.
That would be correct.
Wow.
And so, and there had been, other things that had been happening over the time. I had been working in new construction, very unsuccessfully, I would like to say. That's where I discovered how important generational wealth through housing is. How,
Tell me more
I
about-
mean, also the just crazy difference between, last summer when there was just a boom in the cities with the unhoused population just blowing up because of a lot of factors. And then every day I would go and sit in this new construction model home, and there were just so many homes just sitting and empty, and they were, and they're homes that it doesn't feel like they're well made, and they're charging, $500,000 for them.
while
And
the population of unhoused was exploding.
exactly, and it just, so going through that and just thinking like, okay, but this is where I'm at. Also I had invested a lot of money into this company already because it was very corporate, very 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 corporate, I'll leave it at that, but very much about the money, all around, which, yes, we are trying to make a living, but we can also help people along the way, and that was not necessarily something that was ever reflected at the former brokerage.
So when you say that realtor wasn't going to make enough money, that it's because the buyer was approved for a smaller amount of mortgage, and so that's not enough money, right? If a realtor
Yeah.
earns a commission based on sale price, and you help a buyer buy a house for 170 versus a buyer who's buying a house for $500,000, you're going to make a lot more money on the $500,000 buyer. And this was part of the culture of this brokerage.
Yes,
Where they preferred to work with that $500,000 buyer because they can make more money.
absolutely. And so that was so just all of that combined with and then jumping back a few steps, I brought it up to my team lead that this teammate had said, or that, I think actually he was the one that told me that she didn't work in North Minneapolis. And I said, because, I was like, why did she just give away this lead? That's crazy to me. Why wouldn't you work with somebody that wants to work with you?
Right.
And he said, oh yeah, she doesn't work in North Minneapolis. And I said,
It was the team lead that told you that.
it was. And so I said, that is, that's a ethical violation, is it not? And he said, sorry, I get a little bit worked up about this. But he said, I'm not going to ask someone to work where they don't feel safe. And that was the point where I was just like, yes, I am done here. And it just really showed, and he made excuses for why, helping people doesn't get you anywhere, and how you have to take care of, the people in your life, and all of this stuff.
So
It was,
we all operated under that MO, right? Then that would perpetuate, and it does, it perpetuates inequity. It perpetuates the problems and the challenges that we have today. Would you agree?
absolutely. And I mean, the way that they do real estate, and a lot of brokerages do real estate, is um, the capitalism version of real estate.
That's an
Um,
concept. The
I
capital.
mean, yeah, it's yeah, and it's the same thing with rent. The fact that market rent
Mhm.
has nothing to do with really anything except the fact that people are charging more and it just keeps happening. Um, so I mean, people could, landlords could be charging less. Housing people selling homes could be charging less. It just so happens
Mhm.
it's for some people it's a money making endeavor, and that means destroying suitable housing to put up new, more expensive housing. That was a really big issue that created the boom of unhoused, because there were a lot of demolitions last spring. Um,
In North Minneapolis, or?
definitely over North Minneapolis. But yeah, just taking out, so particularly one spot over in the near north area, there were, oh boy, like 2 blocks of houses that were mostly rentals, some owned, and investor went through and bought out all of them.
Wow.
um and so it was during COVID that everyone ended up getting evicted, and I'm not sure how that worked with the no evictions rule. I don't know if they got some sort of payout, but after those had been evicted, the houses were just sitting there empty with utilities hooked up, everything like that, probably off, but people had started uh going to live in there because it was starting to it was really cold.
Wow.
And at that point, they had ended up boarding up all the windows, and now fast forward to now, they're starting to build high-rise apartments.
Will they be
So
affordable, or will they be market rent?
no, they will not be affordable.
So
Definitely not. There are similar buildings nearby already, and no, it's going to be market.
and in your opinion, what is the average market rent for a 2 bedroom in Minneapolis,
Apartment or house?
or apartment or house? Well, what would be the average rent? Let's talk about what's the average rent, for a 2 bedroom. The last time I looked in Minneapolis, it was upwards of $1,500.
Yeah, it really depends on which part of Minneapolis you're in, but I would say for 2 bedrooms, probably ranging anywhere from, and type of property, 1,200 a month to like 1,800 a month
Right. For a 2 bedroom.
for a 2 bedroom. Sometimes the closer you get to the lakes and uptown and all of that, definitely it just keeps getting up there.
And this is rent. This,
This
this
is rent.
yeah, this is not a mortgage payment.
And so, and right, and that's what's crazy about lending to me, is that if someone consistently can pay their rent and be on time with their rent for presumably, you know 1 to 25 years, 30 years, why is that not good enough? I understand that it's a matter of protecting an investment, but
Don't you think it's interesting that when a what goes into a person's credit score, on-time rent payments is not included. It's not. It is
yep,
not considered at all.
that's just wild. I don't It doesn't make sense.
Right. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the work that you have been engaged with in Minneapolis with the unhoused.
Um, let's see. Honestly, since the winter, I got so worn out. Um, it it is a very, very overwhelming problem. It can feel very defeating, given I think probably with politics everywhere, our political uh leaders, I will say, are not handling the situation with the unhoused properly. So, um, you know, and properly means either affordable housing or a free place to live, that doesn't have restrictions, because that's, I think, one of the biggest things for people in the unhoused communities is a safe place to stay that doesn't conform to a very tight control. Um, so I guess, over the summer last year and the winter, pretty much we had started with a small group that had been evicted from a previous encampment. The city would come and bring bulldozers and, you know, use completely unnecessary force, be very aggressive, throw people's belongings away and just remove them from the space, bulldoze, act like it never happened.
Mm.
So, uh, helping to move, helping to move people that were being evicted from the encampment or from encampments sometimes multiple times in a few days or a few weeks or months or however long the city decided to let it go. Um, so that was a big part of it. Trying to help set up, uh, you know, food options, or consistent food and meals. And I focused on primarily one encampment, but you know, that was a big part of it, and just trying to provide the tools necessary to have some sort of stability. And eventually when it started getting colder and realizing that the city wasn't going to be helping, the shelter system is just absolutely messed up. um, they're very hard for people to get into, um, and then to actually stay in them. There are a lot of restrictions that just make it pretty unbearable, to the point where people would choose being outside over being in those spaces.
Oh,
But so what we eventually started doing when it was getting really cold was trying to winterize by building structures, for people to kind of just hunker down for the winter, because the city was promising X amount of extra shelter space, but
mm,
it actually didn't become available until the spring, at
right.
which point, you just hunker down. Um, and through that, I would say talking with people and figuring and just seeing how people, uh the different paths that lead to being unhoused, and the different barriers that have come up for people, um and that it really just it really just comes down to unfair lending practices, I
Mm,
think.
sure, sure. So how do you how do you bring that into your work? Because I will say that I remember when you came on to ABC Realty, and you hadn't done a transaction yet, and we sat down for our first conversation, and we just kind of like mapped out, your network, and I was like, wow, you're sitting on about 25 grand right now in commissions. Right, just by talking to you and thinking about your network, and then you immediately went out and made that happen. And
Yes, it's
have
been quite a
continued
ride since then.
have continued to do that over and over and over again. So tell us about your rock star status.
Rockstar status currently, and how I got here would be that, my former brokerage was inauthentic. So being here with you guys, just it made me feel like I could be authentic. I can talk about um I can talk about the things that matter to me. It's not a, oh, that's, why would you be talking about that in front of a client? I get to openly express with my clients a mutual concern for housing in this state. And I think that honesty and that authenticity is just, it's helped me get so much closer to the people that are already in my life. Because I mean, before, I had made a Facebook for, my former brokerage. It was like putting on an act, and nobody's interested in that.
Right.
I mean, some people are, but I don't, those aren't necessarily my kind of, people, because we just don't speak to each other. We don't understand each other. Um, so, I mean, I think having, I lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry. Um,
You've been
yeah,
able to be authentic though, and you've been able to work in that space and be a rock star realtor at the same time.
I would say it is what makes me be a rock star realtor, because people trust me because they know what I'm about. Um, I can't, there's, they always said, like, work with everybody,
Mhm.
which is a great sentiment. But as realtors, I feel that it is our duty to not work with people that go against our personal morals. And if our personal morals are telling us, to try to, if you're working on buyer side, try and get, actually both sides, get the most fair price no matter what. Don't do anything sneaky. Don't, make sure that you understand that you work for your client. That kind of thing.
Right.
Sorry.
It's why we have a code of ethics that
Yeah.
governs how we operate and what we do.
It's always very odd to me when I find myself in situations where I have to call out people that have been realtors for a long time and just say, hey, the thing that you're doing right now, this is pretty, like, I could probably cite the violation right here. Like, what are you thinking? And then it's rarely acceptance at that point. So it's just wild to me that even though if it's not going to actually just like be in you, we have a book for it. So being in a brokerage where I constantly have to say, like, there's a book saying what you're doing is wrong, that doesn't work.
Well, I'm so glad that you found ABC Realty.
Me too. Life changing completely.
Yeah, you're awesome, and you're an awesome part of the team for sure. For sure.
Thanks.
Yeah. And so I want to go back to Michaela again. And so you did a lot of data crunching for your senior project in housing. And prior to coming on with ABC Realty, had you ever thought about working in housing?
No, my family was in the market, and so my
Mhm.
grandma was renting. They would
Mm.
take me a lot to do, the house repairs. They'd have me on the floor scrubbing and stuff. And just seeing how kind of tough it was,
Mhm.
I thought, no, I'm not going into real estate at all. That's it's crazy. It's nuts, I thought. And seeing how successful you are in ABC Realty's impact injustice work,
Mhm.
I didn't make the connection when I was young. And so I had this first image of real estate,
Okay.
being bad.
Sure.
And now
Mm.
you've totally changed my world, my whole,
Wow.
perception on
Okay.
how big
Mhm.
a real estate company can be
Mhm.
in the community, and how successful it can be personally, and how
Right.
personally fulfilling the work can be. So thank
Yeah,
you.
you're welcome. You're welcome. And it has been a joy to have you on board. And I loved, you guys getting all geeked up with your community building work on the Housing Justice Coalition, which that work continues. And Michaela, you mentioned earlier that work actually started with ABC Realty in 2019. We decided that we wanted to take on something bigger than just buying and selling real estate, because anybody could do that if they wanted to, but we wanted to take on something bigger. And so we decided that we wanted to take on this what we call the home ownership gap. In Minnesota, we have one of the highest home ownership rates in the country. I believe we oscillate between number 1 and number 3. So we have one of the highest home ownership rates in the country. However, uh, families of color own homes at a rate of, I think, like 41% less than white families. So we have this huge gap in home ownership between families of color and white families in Minnesota. And I think a lot of what you said earlier, Michaela, about these systemic and historic practices that kept families of color from owning homes, or if they did own homes, they could only own homes in areas that were disinvested in, right? That still plays out today. Today it hasn't gone away, and so for us to stand in this space on talking about the homeownership gap and identifying people and identifying entities that are standing in that space to work toward eliminating that homeownership gap became paramount to ABC Realty. And that's kind of what spawned our community building work. And we had fun with it. We brought in partners that were working in that space. We teamed up with the Eastside Freedom Library for the physical space. And we said, well, let's have some conversations like we're doing today. Let's have some conversations about the home ownership gap. And what we heard from the community, we heard that there are young people out there that are couch surfing because they can't afford today's market rents. We heard that there are old folks out there that would love to sell their bread and butter property, but they can't or won't, concede, their sales proceeds to pay for assisted living, and so they're stuck. They're stuck in this property, which, by the way, could free up a lot of inventory, a lot of affordable inventory. If there was a viable option for enough folks that are aging out and aging in place, we could open up a lot of inventory that way. We heard from people that did go into home ownership, that they went through all the steps, they did it, landed in a home only to be greeted by neighbors that didn't want people that looked like them living next door to them. We heard all of these themes emerge in these conversations that we had, and it was, people started coming back. There's a lot of people out here that feel the same way that we feel, that are concerned about the things that we're talking about right now, but they may not have anyone to share it with, or they may not feel comfortable talking about it. And so, we proudly use our platform here at ABC Realty to have these conversations and to open up these discussions. And the conversations that started in 2019 around closing the home ownership gap have evolved into what is known today as the Eastside Housing Justice Coalition. Which is, if you haven't heard about that, look it up. It's a great opportunity to get engaged and to learn more about, the things that impact housing, because it's never as simple as, owning and or renting. There's a lot more things happening in that space, and here at ABC Realty, that's what we want to bring to the table. That's what makes us unique, is we're a brokerage that isn't afraid to stand in this space, and we're not afraid to have these conversations, and we invite you in to join us. So I invite you to stay tuned for our future podcast, because we're going to continue these conversations, and we look forward to talking with you more. Thanks for joining us today.
Great job, you guys. That really
MBC. No relation to NBC.